Sarah Martinez wiped the grease from her hands as she finished checking the fuel lines on the F-16 Fighting Falcon. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Around her, other ground crew members worked methodically, preparing aircraft for another day of training missions. The roar of jet engines filled the air as pilots taxied their planes toward the runway. Sarah had been working as an aircraft maintenance technician for 3 years now. Every day, she watched pilots climb into cockpits and soar into the sky while she remained earthbound, ensuring their aircraft were in perfect condition. The irony wasn't lost on her that she knew these planes better than most of the pilots who flew them. She could diagnose engine problems by sound alone and spot potential issues that others might miss. Growing up in a small town in Texas, Sarah had always dreamed of flying. Her father, a former Air Force mechanic, had filled her childhood with stories of aircraft and the brave men and women who flew them. When she enlisted at 18, she had hoped to become a pilot herself. However, her test scores, while excellent in technical areas, had placed her in the maintenance track rather than flight training. 18 months later, Second Lieutenant Sarah Martinez sat in the cockpit of an F-16 Fighting Falcon at Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas, her hands steady on the controls as she prepared for her first solo combat training mission. The journey from ground crew to pilot had been the most challenging experience of her life, but every grueling hour of training had been worth it to reach this moment. Officer Candidate School had tested her Leah. The briefing took place in a secure facility at an undisclosed location in Eastern Europe. Sarah and 11 other pilots from various squadrons sat in uncomfortable metal chairs, studying satellite photographs and intelligence reports that painted a grim picture of the developing crisis. A rogue military faction had seized control of several airbases in a strategically important region, threatening to destabilize the entire area. Colonel Kim stood before a large map marked with red symbols indicating enemy positions. Intelligence suggests they have approximately 24 fighter aircraft of various types, including some modern equipment obtained through black market arms deals. Our mission is to provide air superiority support for a multinational coalition tasked with restoring legitimate government control. Sarah studied the intelligence photos carefully. Her trained eye recognized several aircraft types from her maintenance days, including MiG-29 Fulcrums, Su-27 Flankers, and what appeared to be modified F-16s similar to the aircraft she had once serviced. The enemy pilots were reportedly experienced mercenaries and defectors from various air forces, making them potentially dangerous opponents. The mission parameters were complex. Coalition forces would provide close air support for ground operations, while Sarah's flight would maintain air superiority over the combat zone. Rules of engagement were strict, requiring positive identification before any weapons release, but the threat level was assessed as high. Sarah was assigned to Blue Flight, call sign Viper, flying the number 2 position behind Major Tom Bradley, an experienced pilot with over 2,000 flight hours. Their wingmen were Captain Jennifer Scott and Lieutenant Mark Torres, both skilled pilots but with limited combat experience. The responsibility of protecting the newer pilots while accomplishing the mission weighed heavily on Sarah's mind. The first day of operations began before dawn. Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision she had learned as a ground crew member, checking every system twice before strapping into the cockpit. The F-16 felt like an extension of her body after hundreds of training hours, but the weight of real weapons under the wings added a soberness that training missions never carried. Viper Flight, this is Control, came the radio call as they taxied toward the runway. You are cleared for takeoff. Current threat assessment is moderate. Expect enemy air activity in your patrol sector. The 4 F-16s lifted off into the gray dawn sky, climbing rapidly toward their assigned altitude. As they approached the combat zone, Sarah's radar operator began feeding them updates on air traffic in the area. Coalition aircraft were already engaged in close air support missions, their radio chatter creating a complex picture of the tactical situation on the ground. Viper Lead, this is Dark Star Control, came the call from the airborne warning and control aircraft monitoring the battle. We have multiple bogies approaching your position from the northeast, distance 40 miles, and closing. Count shows 6 aircraft in 2 formations. Major Bradley acknowledged the call and began positioning the flight for an intercept. Sarah checked her weapons systems one final time, ensuring that her radar-guided missiles and cannon were ready for action. The months of training had prepared her for this moment, but the reality of potential combat sent adrenaline coursing through her system. As the enemy aircraft came within radar range, Sarah immediately recognized something that the others had missed. Viper Lead. Number 2 has electronic warfare systems active on the lead formation. I'm seeing jamming patterns consistent with Su-27 defensive suites. The information allowed Major Bradley to adjust their approach, using tactics specifically designed to counter the Su-27's defensive capabilities. Sarah's technical knowledge was already proving valuable in the combat environment, giving her flight a tactical advantage over enemies who thought their electronic countermeasures would provide protection. The first engagement came suddenly. 2 MiG-29s broke away from the main formation, attempting to flank Viper flight from the south. Sarah and Captain Scott were assigned to intercept them, while Major Bradley and Lieutenant Torres engaged the remaining 4 aircraft. Viper 2, tally 2 bandits, 11 o'clock low. Sarah called as she spotted the enemy fighters maneuvering for position. Her radar locked onto the lead MiG-29, and she selected a medium-range missile for the engagement. Fox 3, she called, indicating the launch of a radar-guided missile. The weapon streaked toward its target, while Sarah immediately began maneuvering to avoid potential return fire. The MiG-29 pilot, apparently unaware of the incoming missile until the last moment, attempted a desperate defensive turn but was too late. Sarah's first missile found its mark, sending the enemy fighter spiraling toward the ground in a ball of flame. Her wingman, Captain Scott, was having trouble with the second MiG-29, which was proving to be more maneuverable than expected. Sarah quickly positioned herself to assist, using her knowledge of the MiG's performance limitations to predict its pilot's tactics. Viper 4, break right, Sarah called as she saw the enemy pilot setting up for a missile shot. I'm coming around for a gun solution. Sarah maneuvered her F-16 into position behind the MiG-29, using the superior thrust-to-weight ratio of her aircraft to maintain an advantageous position. As the enemy pilot attempted to escape by diving toward the deck, Sarah followed, carefully calculating the lead angle required for a cannon attack. The 20mm cannon rounds found their target with devastating effect, tearing through the MiG-29's wing root and causing an immediate loss of control. The enemy pilot ejected moments before his aircraft impacted the ground, marking Sarah's second victory of the mission. Meanwhile, Major Bradley and Lieutenant Torres were engaged in a fierce battle with the remaining 4 enemy aircraft. The Su-27s were proving to be formidable opponents, using their superior maneuverability and long-range missiles to maintain an advantage. One of the enemy pilots managed to achieve a missile lock on Lieutenant Torres, forcing him to jettison his external fuel tanks and break off the engagement. Sarah assessed the tactical situation quickly. The 4 remaining enemy aircraft were attempting to regroup and overwhelm Major Bradley's element through superior numbers. Drawing on her knowledge of radar systems and electronic warfare, she devised a plan that would use the enemy's own tactics against them. Viper Lead, this is 2, she radioed. I recommend we use the terrain masking available to the west and set up a bracket maneuver. Their radar systems have limited look-down capability in that sector. Major Bradley, trusting Sarah's technical expertise, approved the plan. Sarah led Captain Scott through a series of low-altitude maneuvers that took them below the enemy's radar coverage while positioning them for a surprise attack from an unexpected angle. The tactic worked perfectly. As the Su-27s focused their attention on Major Bradley and Lieutenant Torres, Sarah and Captain Scott emerged from the radar shadow at close range. Sarah quickly achieved missile locks on 2 of the enemy aircraft, launching both of her remaining radar-guided missiles in quick succession. Fox 3, she called as both weapons guided toward their targets. The enemy pilots, caught completely off guard by the attack from below, had no time to deploy defensive countermeasures. Both missiles found their marks, destroying 2 Su-27s and evening the odds in the engagement. The remaining 2 enemy pilots, now outnumbered and low on fuel, attempted to disengage from the fight. However, Major Bradley and Lieutenant Torres were positioned to cut off their escape route. In the ensuing chase, Sarah managed to close within cannon range of one of the fleeing Su-27s. Her technical knowledge once again proved crucial as she recognized the specific variant of Su-27 she was pursuing. This particular model had a known vulnerability in its rear quarter, where the engine exhaust created a blind spot for its defensive sensors. Sarah positioned herself in this blind spot and opened fire with her cannon, scoring multiple hits on the enemy aircraft's engine section. The Su-27 began trailing smoke and losing altitude rapidly. Its pilot, realizing his aircraft was critically damaged, ejected safely before the fighter crashed into a mountainside. Sarah's fifth victory of the day made her an instant ace, a distinction achieved by very few pilots in modern air combat. The final enemy aircraft, isolated and outnumbered, was intercepted by Lieutenant Torres, who achieved his first combat victory under Sarah's coaching guidance. The entire engagement had lasted less than 20 minutes, but it had decisively eliminated a major threat to coalition ground forces. As Viper flight returned to base, Sarah reflected on the rapid sequence of events that had led to her unprecedented success. Her unique background as a ground crew member had given her insights into aircraft systems and capabilities that pure flying training could never have provided. The technical knowledge that had once kept her earthbound had become the key to her success in the sky. The debriefing session attracted attention from senior officers throughout the coalition command structure. Sarah's achievement of A status in a single mission was remarkable enough, but the tactical innovations she had employed based on her technical expertise impressed even experienced combat veterans. General Patricia Morrison, the Coalition Air Component Commander, personally congratulated Sarah after the debrief. "Your performance today was exceptional, Lieutenant. But, more importantly, your ability to analyze enemy capabilities and devise effective countermeasures saved the lives of your fellow pilots. That's the mark of a true leader." In the weeks that followed, Sarah continued to fly missions in the combat zone, adding 3 more confirmed victories to her record. Her reputation as both a skilled pilot and tactical innovator spread throughout the international pilot community. The maintenance technician who had once dreamed of flying had become one of the most respected fighter pilots in the modern era. Years later, as Colonel Sarah Martinez stood before a new class of pilot trainees, she would often reflect on the journey that had brought her to that point. Her unique path from ground crew to ace pilot had taught her that success often comes from combining different types of knowledge and experience in unexpected ways. "Flying is only part of being a fighter pilot," she would tell her students. "Understanding your aircraft, your enemy, and the technical systems that make modern air combat possible is equally important. Never discount any knowledge or experience, because you never know when it might save your life or the lives of your teammates." The young pilots listened intently, many of them unaware that they were receiving instruction from a legend who had proven that determination, technical expertise, and a willingness to think creatively could overcome any obstacle. Sarah's story had become an inspiration throughout the Air Force, demonstrating that the most successful warriors often come from the most unexpected backgrounds, leadership abilities, and military knowledge. But it was pilot training that truly pushed her to her limits. The academic coursework was intense, covering aerodynamics, navigation, weather systems, and flight regulations. However, Sarah's background in aircraft maintenance gave her a significant advantage when it came to understanding how the various systems worked together. Her flight instructor, Major Rebecca Walsh, had noticed Sarah's exceptional situational awareness from her very first training flight. Most new pilots are so focused on flying the aircraft that they miss what's happening around them, Major Walsh had observed after a particularly complex training exercise. "You seem to process multiple information streams simultaneously while maintaining perfect control of your aircraft." Sarah's unique perspective, gained from years of troubleshooting aircraft problems on the ground, translated into an intuitive understanding of how her plane would behave in different situations. She could feel when an engine wasn't running at optimal parameters or when control surfaces weren't responding with their usual precision. This sensitivity to her aircraft's condition, combined with her technical knowledge, made her an exceptionally safe and skilled pilot. During advanced training, Sarah specialized in air-to-air combat. The tactical scenarios grew increasingly complex, requiring split-second decisions while managing radar systems, communications, and weapons controls. Her instructors were impressed by her ability to diagnose and compensate for simulated system failures while maintaining combat effectiveness. One particular training exercise stood out in her memory. Sarah had been flying a mission against veteran instructor pilots when her aircraft's radar system began malfunctioning. Most pilots would have been forced to break off the engagement, but Sarah recognized the specific pattern of the malfunction from her maintenance days. She knew exactly which backup systems to activate and how to compensate for the degraded radar performance. Using visual scanning techniques and radio calls from her wingman, Sarah successfully engaged 3 simulated enemy aircraft despite her handicapped sensors. The mission debriefers were amazed when they learned she had been flying with a 40% reduction in radar capability for the entire engagement. "How did you know to switch to backup mode 3?" asked Colonel Martinez, the chief training officer. "That's not a standard procedure." Sarah explained her reasoning based on the specific error codes she had observed. "I've seen this exact malfunction during maintenance. The primary radar was cycling through a diagnostic loop, but the backup system was fully functional. I just needed to isolate the faulty components." After completing pilot training at the top of her class, Sarah was assigned to the 64th Aggressor Squadron at Nellis Air Force Base, ironically returning to where her aviation journey had begun. The Aggressor Squadron's mission was to provide realistic air combat training by simulating enemy tactics and aircraft capabilities. It was considered one of the most prestigious assignments for a new pilot. Her squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel David Kim, was a former Top Gun instructor with extensive combat experience. He had specifically requested Sarah for his unit after reviewing her training records. "We need pilots who can think creatively and adapt to unexpected situations," he had told her during her initial briefing. "Your background gives you perspectives that pure fighter pilots sometimes lack." Sarah's first months with the aggressors were a masterclass in air combat tactics. She flew against pilots from around the world, learning to think like an enemy and exploit weaknesses in friendly formations. The experience taught her to see air combat from multiple perspectives, understanding both the capabilities and limitations of various aircraft and tactics. Her technical background proved invaluable during these exercises. Sarah could quickly assess what tactics would be most effective against specific aircraft types based on her knowledge of their systems and performance characteristics. She became particularly skilled at exploiting radar blind spots and electronic countermeasures, using her understanding of sensor systems to maximum advantage. The turning point in Sarah's career came during a major international training exercise called Red Flag. Pilots from 12 different countries participated in complex scenarios that closely simulated real combat conditions. Sarah was assigned to fly as part of the opposing force, tasked with intercepting a large formation of Allied aircraft attempting to strike simulated targets deep in enemy territory. The mission began routinely enough. Sarah and her wingman, Captain Lisa Park, were vectored toward a formation of F-15 Eagles and F/A-18 Super Hornets approaching from the south. The plan was to engage the fighters while staying clear of the heavily defended bomber formation they were escorting. However, as they approached the intercept point, Sarah noticed something unusual on her radar display. The enemy formation's electronic signatures didn't match what they had been briefed to expect. Her maintenance experience had taught her to recognize the subtle differences between various radar modes and configurations. "Eagle 2, I'm seeing anomalous radar returns from the target formation," she radioed to her wingman. "These aren't the aircraft we were briefed about." Captain Park checked her own displays. "My radar shows standard F-15 signatures, Eagle 1. What are you seeing that I'm not?" Sarah studied the patterns more carefully, her mind racing through the technical specifications she had memorized years earlier. "The pulse repetition frequency is wrong for standard F-15 radars. I think we're looking at F-22 Raptors using electronic masking to simulate older aircraft." The F-22 Raptor was the most advanced fighter in the world, with stealth capabilities that made it nearly invisible to most radar systems. If Sarah was correct, They were about to fly into an ambush against aircraft that significantly outclassed their own F-16s. "How can you be sure?" Captain Park asked, trusting Sarah's judgment despite the unusual nature of her assessment. Sarah explained the technical details she had observed, drawing on her deep knowledge of radar systems and electronic warfare. "I've calibrated sensors on both aircraft types. The F-22's radar has a unique signature when it's operating in training mode. We need to change our approach." Instead of proceeding with the planned intercept, Sarah recommended a more cautious approach that would allow them to confirm the enemy aircraft types before engaging. Her suspicions proved correct when the formation revealed itself to be 4 F-22 Raptors accompanied by 2 F-15 Eagles, a much more formidable force than they had been prepared to face. Thanks to Sarah's early warning, she and Captain Park were able to adjust their tactics accordingly. They used terrain masking and chaff dispensers to avoid detection while positioning themselves for hit-and-run attacks. The resulting engagement was one of the most successful intercept missions of the entire Red Flag exercise, with Sarah and her wingmen achieving multiple simulated kills against superior aircraft through superior tactics and situational awareness. The mission debrief attracted attention from senior officers throughout the exercise. Sarah's ability to correctly identify enemy aircraft types based on subtle electronic signatures impressed even the most experienced pilots. Her technical knowledge had directly contributed to tactical success in a way that pure flying skills could never have achieved. Following Red Flag, Sarah's reputation as an exceptional pilot began to spread throughout the fighter community. She was selected for advanced courses in electronic warfare and air combat tactics, consistently performing at the top of her class. Her unique combination of technical expertise and piloting skills made her increasingly valuable as tensions began to rise in various global hotspots. The call that would change everything came on a quiet Tuesday morning in September. Sarah was in the briefing room reviewing the day's training schedule when Lieutenant Colonel Kim entered with a serious expression. "Martinez, I need to see you in my office immediately," he said. In his office, Colonel Kim closed the door and turned to face her. "I've just received orders from Air Combat Command. There's a developing situation overseas that requires our immediate attention. I can't give you details here, but I need to know if you're ready for a real-world mission." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. After years of training exercises and simulated combat, the possibility of actual combat operations was both exciting and sobering. "Yes, sir. I'm ready." Colonel Kim nodded. "Pack your gear for an extended deployment. We're wheels up in 6 hours. You'll be briefed on the mission details once we're airborne." As Sarah hurried to her quarters to pack, her mind raced with possibilities. Her journey from ground crew to combat pilot was about to face its ultimate test. The technical knowledge and flying skills she had developed over years of training would soon be put to use in defense of her country's interests. She thought back to that day in the maintenance hangar when she had first decided to pursue pilot training. The dream that had seemed so impossible then was now leading her toward a mission that would test every skill she had learned. As she zipped up her flight bag and headed toward the flight line, Sarah Martinez was ready to prove that her unique path to the cockpit had prepared her for whatever challenges lay ahead. The aircraft waiting on the tarmac bore no identifying markings, and the crew loading it wore civilian clothes despite their obviously military bearing. Whatever mission awaited her, it was clear that the stakes were higher than any training exercise she had ever flown. Sarah's transformation from ground crew to pilot was complete, but her greatest test was just beginning. The disappointment had stung initially, but Sarah threw herself into her work with determination. She quickly became one of the best technicians on the base, earning respect from both her peers and the pilots whose lives depended on her meticulous attention to detail. Her supervisor, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, often said that Sarah had an almost supernatural ability to understand aircraft systems. One particular morning in March, Sarah was performing routine maintenance on Captain Jake Thompson's F-16 when she noticed something unusual. The aircraft's control stick felt slightly loose during her pre-flight check. It was a subtle issue that most people would have missed, but Sarah's trained hands detected the minute difference in resistance. She immediately grounded the aircraft and began a thorough inspection. After 2 hours of careful examination, She discovered a hairline crack in one of the control linkages. If left unrepaired, it could have resulted in complete control failure during flight. Captain Thompson, a seasoned pilot with over 1,000 flight hours, was initially skeptical when Sarah explained the problem. "I've been flying this bird for 6 months," he said, examining the tiny crack through a magnifying glass. "I never felt anything wrong with the controls." Sarah showed him the technical specifications and explained how the crack would gradually worsen under flight stress. "Give it another 50 flight hours, and you would have lost stick control completely," she said matter-of-factly. Captain Thompson stared at the crack for a long moment, then looked at Sarah with new respect. "You just saved my life," he said quietly. "How did you even know to look for this?" Sarah shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. The stick felt different during the control check. Just a fraction of an inch of extra play, but enough to make me suspicious. Word of Sarah's discovery spread quickly through the squadron. Pilots began seeking her out specifically to work on their aircraft, trusting her expertise above all others. But even as her reputation grew, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant for something more than ground support. Her opportunity came in an unexpected way. The base was hosting a joint training exercise with international allies, and several countries had sent their top pilots to participate. Among them was Squadron Leader Emma Chun from the Royal Air Force, one of the few female fighter pilots in her service, and a recognized ace with 5 confirmed air-to-air victories. Sarah was assigned to maintain Squadron Leader Chun's Eurofighter Typhoon during her stay at Nellis. As she worked on the aircraft, Chun often stopped by to chat, impressed by Sarah's knowledge of aircraft systems. During one of these conversations, Chun mentioned that she had started her military career as a ground crew member before transitioning to pilot training. "Really?" Sarah asked, pausing in her inspection of the Typhoon's radar system. "How did you make the switch?" Chun smiled. "Persistence, mostly. I applied for pilot training 3 times before they accepted me. The 3rd time, I included detailed recommendations from 5 different squadron commanders who had seen my work. They couldn't ignore that level of endorsement." This conversation planted a seed in Sarah's mind. That evening, she researched the requirements for transitioning from enlisted to officer and pilot training. The path was challenging but not impossible. She would need excellent fitness scores, strong recommendations, and to pass the same aptitude tests that had originally placed her in maintenance. Over the following weeks, Sarah began preparing in earnest. She started each day with a 5-mile run before her shift, followed by strength training in the evening. She studied flight manuals and aerodynamics texts in her spare time, absorbing everything she could about the theoretical aspects of flying. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. Captain Thompson, still grateful for her life-saving discovery, offered to help her study. Soon, other pilots joined in, creating an informal study group that met twice a week. They covered everything from air combat tactics to navigation systems, treating Sarah as a fellow aviator rather than just maintenance crew. The breakthrough came when Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander, observed one of these study sessions. Colonel Hayes was a former Thunderbirds demonstration pilot with over 20 years of flight experience. She watched as Sarah confidently explained the aerodynamic principles behind a particular combat maneuver, using technical knowledge that impressed even the seasoned pilots in the room. After the session, Colonel Hayes approached Sarah privately. "Sergeant Martinez," she said, "I've been watching your work for some time. Your technical skills are exceptional, and your understanding of aircraft systems is remarkable. Have you ever considered applying for pilot training?" Sarah felt her heart race. "Yes, ma'am. I've been studying for the aptitude tests." Colonel Hayes nodded approvingly. "I'd like to nominate you for the next officer training class. If you're serious about this, I'll put my full endorsement behind your application." The application process was grueling. Sarah had to pass physical fitness tests, psychological evaluations, and comprehensive written examinations covering everything from mathematics to spatial reasoning. The flight aptitude test, conducted in a sophisticated simulator, pushed her to her limits as she navigated complex scenarios while managing multiple aircraft systems. 3 months after submitting her application, Sarah received the letter she had been anxiously awaiting. She had been accepted into officer candidate school, with pilot training to follow upon successful completion. The letter was signed by Colonel Hayes, with a handwritten note at the bottom. You've earned this opportunity through dedication and skill. Now show them what we already know you're capable of. Sarah's fellow ground crew members threw an impromptu celebration in the maintenance hangar that evening. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been like a father figure to her, presented her with a small pin shaped like wings. "These are temporary," he said with a grin. "You'll get the real ones soon enough." As Sarah looked around at the faces of her colleagues and the aircraft they maintained together, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. She was leaving behind the familiar world of wrenches and diagnostic equipment to pursue a dream that had seemed impossible just months before. Captain Thompson pulled her aside as the celebration wound down. "You know," he said, "most pilots understand their aircraft pretty well. But you understand them better than anyone I've ever met. That's going to make you one hell of a pilot." Sarah's last day as a ground crew member was bittersweet. She performed one final inspection on the F-16 she had worked on countless times, running her hands along the fuselage with the familiarity of long practice. Tomorrow, she would report to Officer Candidate School, beginning a journey that would transform her from someone who prepared aircraft for flight into someone who would command them in the sky. As she watched the evening training flights take off, Sarah allowed herself to imagine the day when she would be in one of those cockpits instead of watching from the ground. The dream that had sustained her through years of maintenance work was finally becoming reality. She had proven that with determination, skill, and the support of those who believed in her, even the most ambitious goals could be achieved. The transition from enlisted to officer would be challenging, and pilot training even more so. But Sarah had spent years learning every system, every bolt, every wire that kept these magnificent machines in the air. Now she was ready to learn how to become one with them in flight, taking her first steps toward a destiny that would eventually lead her to become one of the most skilled combat pilots in the Air Force. Little did she know that her unique background and deep understanding of aircraft systems would soon prove invaluable in ways she couldn't yet imagine, setting the stage for achievements that would surpass even her most ambitious dreams.